The recruitment center on Nexus Station buzzed with nervous energy as species from across the galaxy gathered for their chance to join the elite Void Rangers. Commander Zektar observed the crowd through his compound eyes, noting the usual suspects. Proud Valorian warriors flexed their crystalline exoskeletons. Swift Aerith scouts tested their wing membranes. Even a few hulking granite-born had made the journey from their heavy world colonies. Then his gaze fell upon the human. She sat alone in the corner, seemingly oblivious to the intimidating presence of the other candidates. Her small frame looked almost fragile compared to the armored giants surrounding her. Brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Unremarkable clothing that appeared to be standard civilian wear rather than military gear. She clutched a worn datapad and occasionally glanced up with what Zektar recognized as anxiety. "First time seeing a human volunteer?" asked his aide, Lieutenant Mordak, following his commander's line of sight. Zektar clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Indeed, they're still relatively new to the galactic community. Most species require centuries of spacefaring experience before they even attempt ranger selection. The human woman seemed to sense their attention and looked up briefly. Her eyes met Zektar's across the room, and she offered a tentative smile before quickly looking away. The gesture struck him as endearingly nervous. "What's her background?" Zektar inquired. Mordak consulted his tablet. Sarah Chen, age 28, from Earth Colony, New Vancouver. Previous military experience? None listed. Education shows standard civilian engineering degree. No special combat training, no enhanced modifications, no notable physical augmentations. Curious. Zektar watched as Sarah accidentally dropped her datapad and scrambled to retrieve it, bumping into a nearby Valorian who growled in annoyance. Why would someone with no military background attempt ranger selection? The Void Rangers represented the galaxy's most elite fighting force, tasked with handling threats too dangerous for regular military units. Their selection process was legendarily brutal, designed to break even the strongest warriors. Most candidates came from military backgrounds spanning decades. Many were veterans of multiple conflicts. As if sensing the weight of scrutiny, Sarah looked up again. This time she stood and approached their observation deck, her steps uncertain but determined. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor. "I wanted to ask about the evaluation process. The documentation seemed a bit unclear about the physical requirements." Zektar studied her more closely. Up close, he could see calluses on her hands that spoke of manual labor, but her overall appearance remained that of a civilian. "The requirements are intentionally vague," he explained gently. "Each species faces challenges tailored to their capabilities. What matters isn't meeting specific benchmarks, but demonstrating the qualities we seek, which are adaptability, resilience, the ability to function under impossible circumstances." He paused, noting how intently she listened. "Why do you wish to become a ranger, Miss Chen?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, her fingers unconsciously touching something beneath her shirt. "Someone needs to do the job," she said simply. "And I think I might be suited for it." The answer puzzled Zektar. Most candidates spoke of honor, glory, or proving their species' worth. Sarah's response seemed almost reluctant, as if she were accepting an unwelcome responsibility rather than pursuing a dream. "Very well. Report to Base 7 at 800 tomorrow. Bring only essential personal items." After she left, Mordak shook his head. "She won't last past the first evaluation. Humans are still too soft, too inexperienced. What can they possibly offer that other species cannot provide better?" Zektar continued watching Sarah as she navigated through the crowd of imposing warriors, looking small and out of place. Something about her demeanor nagged at him. The nervousness seemed genuine, but underneath it lay something else. A steadiness that didn't match her apparent inexperience. Perhaps, he mused, we're about to find out. That evening, Zektar reviewed the candidate files again. Sarah's application was remarkably unremarkable. Standard education, civilian work history, no red flags. Yet something had driven her to travel across the galaxy to attempt one of the most challenging selection processes known to exist. He pulled up humanity's military records, still relatively brief compared to other species. What he found was interesting. Humans seemed to possess an unusual trait their xenobiologists called adaptive resilience. They functioned well in crisis situations and showed remarkable recovery from trauma. Still, that hardly seemed sufficient for ranger training. The next morning, Zektar positioned himself to observe the initial evaluations. 43 candidates had assembled in Bay 7, representing 12 different species. Sarah stood near the back, looking even smaller among the assembled warriors. "Welcome to Ranger Selection," announced drill instructor Thakmor, his massive Krillian frame casting shadows across the bay. "Over the next 6 days, you will face challenges designed to break you. Most of you will fail. Some of you will be injured. A few might not survive." Several candidates shifted nervously. Sarah remained perfectly still. "Your first evaluation begins now. Navigate the obstacle course within the time limit for your species. Failure means immediate dismissal." As the candidates lined up, Zektar noticed Sarah checking something inside her jacket again. The gesture was subtle, almost unconscious, like touching a good luck charm, or perhaps something else entirely. When her turn came, Sarah approached the starting line with that same nervous energy she'd displayed the day before. The course ahead looked brutal even by ranger standards, featuring obstacles designed to challenge multiple species simultaneously. "Begin," Thakmor commanded. Sarah moved forward with surprising confidence, and Zektar found himself leaning forward to watch more closely. Something about her movement seemed different now, more purposeful, more practiced. As she navigated the first obstacle, scaling a wall that should have challenged someone of her size, Zektar began to suspect that Sarah Chen might not be quite the first-timer she appeared to be. Sarah moved through the obstacle course with fluid precision that made Zektar's antennae twitch with suspicion. Where other candidates relied on brute strength or natural advantages, she used leverage, momentum, and timing. Her technique looked almost casual, as if she were taking a leisurely stroll rather than attempting one of the galaxy's most challenging physical evaluations. She vaulted over barriers that forced Valorian warriors to smash through them. She slipped through narrow passages that required Aerith scouts to fold their wings painfully tight. When she reached the rope climb, instead of struggling hand over hand like the others, she used her legs to grip and push, ascending in smooth, efficient movements. "Interesting technique," Mordak observed. "Almost like she's done this before." Zektar said nothing, but privately agreed. Sarah's movements carried the unconscious competence of extensive training, yet her file remained stubbornly civilian. The course's final obstacle was the trust fall, a 30-meter drop into a narrow chute that required precise timing to catch the safety line. Many candidates hesitated at the edge, calculating angles and distances. Sarah barely paused. She stepped off the platform without apparent fear, caught the line perfectly, and swung to the finish. Her time ranked in the top 5 overall, impressive for any candidate. Remarkable for someone supposedly without military background. "Outstanding performance. Chen?" drill instructor Thakmor announced as she approached the finish line. "Your form suggests prior training. Care to elaborate?" Sarah's nervousness returned instantly, the confident operative disappearing behind anxious civilian facade. I did some rock climbing back home. Recreational stuff." Thakmor's expression suggested he found this explanation insufficient, but he moved on to the next candidate. Zektar made a mental note to investigate further. The afternoon brought psychological evaluations, series of scenarios designed to test decision-making under pressure. Candidates faced holographic simulations of combat situations, hostage crises, and impossible moral choices. Zektar observed from the monitoring room as Sarah entered her simulation. The scenario: a civilian transport under attack by pirates, multiple casualties, limited resources, and competing priorities for rescue efforts. Most candidates either froze under the pressure or made decisions based on their species' natural inclinations. Valorians chose aggressive assault. Aerith scouts prioritized speed and mobility. Granite-born focused on defensive positions. Sarah assessed the situation with unsettling calm. She identified tactical advantages, predicted enemy movements, and coordinated rescue efforts with military precision. Her decisions were quick, decisive, and strategically sound. More importantly, she adapted her approach when initial plans failed, showing the flexible thinking that separated good soldiers from exceptional ones. "Run her psychological profile again," Zektar ordered. The results came back identical to her initial screening. No indicators of military conditioning, no signs of combat stress or traumatic experience. According to every test they had, Sarah Chen was exactly what she appeared to be. a civilian engineer with no special training, yet her performance suggested otherwise. During the evening meal, Zektar positioned himself where he could observe the candidates' interactions. Most clustered by species sharing familiar foods and languages, Sarah sat alone again, picking at something that approximated human cuisine. A Valorian warrior named Kethrak approached her table, his crystalline plates clicking with each step. "Human," he growled. "Your performance today was unusual for one so small and weak." Sarah looked up with that same nervous smile. "I got lucky, I guess." "Luck?" Kethrak's laugh sounded like grinding stone. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you hide something. Warriors recognize other warriors regardless of species." "I'm not a warrior," Sarah replied quietly. "I'm just someone trying to do what's right." "Then you will fail," Kethrak declared. "Rangers require strength, aggression, the will to dominate enemies. You possess none of these qualities." Sarah's hand moved unconsciously toward her chest again, touching whatever she kept hidden beneath her shirt. "Maybe," she said. "But sometimes the best weapons are the ones your enemies don't see coming." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Kethrak stared at her for a long moment, then returned to his own table without another word. Later that night, Zektar accessed the station's security feeds, reviewing footage of Sarah's arrival and movements. Most of it showed exactly what he expected: a nervous civilian trying to navigate an intimidating military environment. But there were moments, brief instances when she thought no one was watching, where her posture changed. Her eyes would sweep a room with tactical awareness. Her movements would become more controlled, more purposeful. These lapses lasted only seconds before the anxious civilian mask returned. Professional training left marks that were difficult to erase completely. Sarah showed all the signs of extensive military conditioning, yet somehow had managed to scrub her official record clean. The question was why. Zektar pulled up Earth's recent history, searching for conflicts that might have produced someone with Sarah's apparent skills. What he found made his blood run cold. The human-Zephyrian border wars had ended only 3 years ago, after nearly a decade of brutal fighting. Earth's military had gained a reputation for unconventional tactics and extraordinary resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Their special forces units in particular had achieved legendary status among intelligence circles. Most concerning were reports of deep cover operations, human operatives who spent years establishing civilian identities while carrying out sensitive missions. These agents were trained to blend seamlessly into normal society, their military backgrounds carefully erased from official records. Zektar stared at Sarah's file with new understanding. If his suspicions were correct, she wasn't a nervous first-timer at all. She was a professional soldier with years of combat experience, trained in deception and infiltration. The question remained, what was a human special forces operative doing at Ranger selection, and what was she really after? As if summoned by his thoughts, his communicator chimed with an urgent message from Central Command. The content made his mandibles click with alarm. Intelligence had detected increased Zephyrian activity in the border sectors. Long-range scans suggested they were massing forces for another offensive. More troubling reports indicated they had developed new weapons technologies, specifically designed to counter Ranger tactics. The timing of Sarah's arrival suddenly seemed far from coincidental. Zektar closed the file and prepared for tomorrow's evaluations with growing concern. Whether Sarah Chen was what she appeared to be or something far more dangerous, he intended to find out the truth, even if that truth might change everything about how the galaxy viewed humanity's role in their cosmic community. The second day of evaluation brought live combat simulations using training weapons that delivered painful, but non-lethal feedback. Candidates faced off against holographic enemies programmed with the tactical patterns of known galactic threats. Zektar watched Sarah gear up with the others, noting how naturally she handled the equipment, despite claiming no military experience. Her fingers found weapon controls without looking, adjusted armor straps with practiced efficiency, and checked systems in a sequence that suggested extensive familiarity. "Chen, you're assigned to Team 3, drill instructor Thakmore announced. You'll be working with Kethrak, Velshan, and Mortek." The team composition was clearly designed to test leadership dynamics. Kethrak represented overwhelming physical power. Velshan brought Aerith speed and agility, while Mortek offered granite-born defensive capabilities. Sarah would either prove herself capable of coordinating diverse abilities or be crushed trying. The simulation began in an urban environment plagued by terrorist attacks. Multiple hostage situations, booby traps, and enemy combatants required simultaneous response. Most teams struggled with coordination, each member defaulting to species-specific approaches that conflicted with teammates' methods. Sarah's team moved differently. Kethrak, you take point on building entry, she directed quietly. Your armor can absorb whatever they throw at us. Felshan, I need you providing overwatch from above. Call out enemy positions. Mortek, watch our backs and be ready to establish defensive positions if we need to retreat. The human gives orders? Kethrak's tone carried dangerous undertones. I'm making suggestions, Sarah replied calmly. But if anyone has better tactical assessment, I'm listening. Something in her voice made the others pause. Not nervousness this time, but quiet authority backed by confidence that seemed to come from experience rather than bravado. They proceeded through the simulation with remarkable efficiency. Sarah anticipated enemy movements, predicted ambush points, and coordinated her team's diverse abilities into seamless cooperation. When Kethrak became pinned down by crossfire, she directed Velshan to create a distraction while Mortek provided covering fire, then personally flanked the enemy position to eliminate the threat. Her combat skills were undeniable. She moved like someone who had fought real battles, not training simulations. Her marksmanship was exceptional, her tactical awareness superior to candidates with decades of military service. Remarkable, Mordak commented from the observation deck. She's making them look like a veteran special forces unit. Too remarkable, Zektar replied grimly. The simulation concluded with Sarah's team achieving the highest score of the day. As they removed their equipment, Kethrak approached her with newfound respect. Human, he said formally, I misjudged you. You fight with honor and skill. Where did you learn such tactics? Sarah's nervous mask slipped back into place. Video games mostly, strategy simulations. I guess some of it transferred over. The explanation was so absurd that even Kethrak looked skeptical. But he said nothing more. That afternoon brought individual interviews with psychological evaluation specialists. Zektar positioned himself to monitor Sarah's session personally. Dr. Nixala, a renowned telepathic counselor, conducted the interview using standard psychological profiling techniques combined with subtle empathic reading. Most candidates revealed their true motivations under her gentle but persistent questioning. Tell me about your childhood, Sarah, Dr. Nixala began. Pretty normal. Grew up on New Vancouver Colony. My parents were agricultural engineers, helped develop the farming systems that made the planet habitable. Any traumatic experiences? Violence? Loss? Sarah's hand moved toward her chest again. That unconscious gesture Zektar had noticed repeatedly. No more than anyone else. Colonial life can be challenging, but nothing unusual. Dr. Nixala's antennae twitched, indicating she sensed emotional deception. What motivated you to leave your homeworld and attempt ranger selection? Someone needs to protect the colonies. The outer worlds are vulnerable to pirate attacks, natural disasters, all sorts of problems. I thought maybe I could help. Noble goals. But ranger training is extraordinarily difficult. What makes you believe you can succeed where warriors with decades of experience have failed? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that seemed too heavy for her apparent age and experience. Because I've already lost everything that mattered to me. Fear of failure doesn't mean much when you've got nothing left to lose. The statement caught Dr. Nixala off guard. Her empathic reading spiked, detecting layers of grief and trauma that Sarah's psychological profile hadn't revealed. Whatever had happened to her, it had left deep emotional scars carefully hidden beneath her civilian facade. Would you like to tell me about that loss? Dr. Nixala asked gently. Sarah's fingers finally pulled out what she'd been touching throughout the evaluation process. It was a small metallic object that caught the light strangely, its surface seeming to shift colors depending on the angle. Zektar's breath caught in his throat. He recognized the object immediately, a human military decoration, specifically a Purple Heart, awarded for wounds received in combat. But Sarah wasn't wearing just one. As she held the chain, 5 identical medals became visible, each representing a separate combat injury. My squad, Sarah said quietly. They didn't make it home. Dr. Nixala's empathic abilities suddenly made sense of Sarah's emotional landscape. Beneath the nervous civilian exterior lay profound survivor's guilt, carefully controlled grief, and the kind of emotional damage that only came from watching comrades die in battle. You were military, Dr. Nexala stated. For a while. Sarah tucked the medals back beneath her shirt. It ended badly. I came here because the Rangers do work that matters, protecting people who can't protect themselves. And because sitting on New Vancouver doing nothing felt like betraying everyone who didn't come home. The interview continued for another hour, but Zektar had heard enough. Sarah Chen wasn't just a decorated combat veteran. She was a survivor of something traumatic enough to earn 5 Purple Hearts, which suggested extensive combat experience under extraordinary circumstances. After the session ended, Zektar accessed classified military databases using his command authorization. What he found confirmed his worst suspicions. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen had served with the 42nd Deep Reconnaissance Unit during the border wars. Her official record was classified at the highest levels, but Zektar's position granted him access to summary information, multiple commendations for exceptional bravery, extensive special operations training, deployment to some of the war's most dangerous theaters, and a final mission that had gone catastrophically wrong, resulting in her unit's complete destruction, and her own medical discharge due to injuries. The 5 Purple Hearts represented 5 separate occasions where she had been wounded in combat but continued fighting. The psychological evaluation that followed her discharge described severe survivor guilt and post-traumatic stress, but also noted her exceptional resilience and continued fitness for duty despite her injuries. Sarah Chen wasn't a nervous first-timer. She was one of humanity's most decorated war heroes, carrying emotional scars from conflicts that had forged her into exactly the kind of operative the Rangers needed. The question was why she was hiding her true background, and what she really hoped to accomplish by joining the galaxy's most elite fighting force. Zektar had a feeling that tomorrow's evaluations would provide some very interesting answers. Day 3 brought the evaluation that separated true Ranger material from even the best conventional soldiers, the crisis response scenario. Candidates faced an active terrorist situation with real lives at stake, not holographic simulations. A passenger liner had been seized by Zephyrian extremists in the station's docking bay. 67 civilians held hostage. Demands for prisoner releases and threats to detonate the ship's reactor if authorities intervened. The situation was real, though the terrorists were actually Ranger instructors using non-lethal weapons and the civilians were volunteers in protective gear. Your mission, Commander Zektar announced to the remaining 28 candidates, is to resolve this crisis with minimal casualties. You have whatever resources the station can provide and 2 hours to develop a plan. Most teams immediately began arguing about approach. Valorians favored direct assault. Aerith scouts wanted stealth infiltration. Granite-born pushed for siege tactics. The debates grew heated as each species insisted their natural advantages made them ideal for leadership. Sarah studied the situation quietly, then approached the station's intelligence officer. What do we know about the hostage-takers' equipment and deployment? Standard Zephyrian military gear, Lieutenant Mordak replied. Energy weapons, personal shields, combat armor. They've positioned themselves strategically throughout the ship with overlapping fields of fire. What about the ship's systems? Life support, power distribution, emergency protocols?
Why would that matter?
Asked Kethrak, who had been listening. We should simply overwhelm them with superior firepower. Sarah pulled up the liner's technical specifications on a nearby terminal. Because sometimes the best way to win a fight is to change the rules of engagement. Her fingers moved across the interface with practiced efficiency, highlighting key system nodes and emergency pathways. Within minutes, she had mapped every maintenance tunnel, backup power relay, and life support junction on the ship. The Zephyrians are expecting a conventional assault, she explained. They've positioned themselves to counter direct attacks, stealth infiltration, and siege tactics. But they're thinking like ground-based soldiers, not spaceship operations specialists. She pointed to specific locations on the ship's schematic. If we cut power to these sections in sequence, we can force them to relocate to more vulnerable positions. Meanwhile, teams enter through maintenance tunnels here and here, bypassing their defensive perimeters entirely. That requires precise timing and coordination, observed Velshan. If even one element fails, hostages could be killed. True, Sarah agreed. But it's our best chance of resolving this without casualties. What followed was a masterclass in tactical planning. Sarah assigned roles based on each candidate's natural abilities, while accounting for the complex interaction between different species' capabilities. She coordinated timing down to the second, established communication protocols, and prepared contingency plans for multiple failure scenarios. More importantly, she did it all while maintaining her nervous civilian persona, presenting ideas as suggestions rather than orders, letting stronger personalities believe they were making the decisions. "You have tactical experience," Kethrak stated during planning. It wasn't a question. "I play a lot of strategy games," Sarah replied with that same self-deprecating smile. "I guess I think about problems differently than most people." The operation commenced exactly on schedule. Power cuts forced the terrorists to abandon their primary positions. Infiltration teams moved through maintenance tunnels with surgical precision. The final assault happened simultaneously from 4 directions, overwhelming the hostage-takers before they could react. Total time, 43 minutes. Casualties, 0. The operation succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. "Outstanding work," drill instructor Thakmore announced as the teams reassembled. "Particularly impressive coordination and leadership." "Chen, step forward." Sarah approached with visible nervousness, though Zektar now recognized it as carefully maintained camouflage. "Your plan demonstrated exceptional tactical thinking," Thakmore continued. "Where did you develop such capabilities?" "I just tried to think about what would work best," Sarah replied. "Everyone else had better ideas about their own specialties. I just helped coordinate them." The humility seemed genuine, but Zektar detected something else beneath it. Not false modesty, but the kind of deep exhaustion that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long. That evening, Zektar made his decision. He approached Sarah during the meal period, sitting across from her at the otherwise empty table. "Staff Sergeant Chen," he said quietly. Sarah's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. For just a moment, her carefully maintained mask slipped completely, revealing the hardened veteran beneath. Then the nervous civilian returned, but the damage was done. "I'm sorry, I don't understand," she said. "The 42nd Deep Reconnaissance Unit," Zektar continued relentlessly. "Operation Nightfall. The Kepler Station incident." Each reference hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her breathing became shallow, her hands trembling slightly. The 5 purple hearts she wore beneath her shirt suddenly carried visible weight. "Why are you here, Sergeant?" Zektar asked gently. "What are you really after?" Sarah stared at her meal for a long moment, then slowly looked up. When she spoke, the nervous mask was completely gone, replaced by someone much older and more dangerous than her appearance suggested. "Because the Zephyrians are coming back," she said quietly. "The intelligence reports are classified, but certain patterns in their movements suggest they're preparing for another offensive. Bigger than before." Zektar's mandibles clicked with surprise. "How could you possibly know about classified intelligence reports?" "Because someone had to warn the Rangers." Sarah's voice carried the weight of terrible certainty. "The border wars didn't end because we won. They ended because both sides ran out of resources to continue fighting. But the Zephyrians have had 3 years to rebuild, to develop new weapons specifically designed to counter our tactics. And you came here to prepare." Sarah touched the metals beneath her shirt again. "My unit died because we weren't ready for what we faced. The Zephyrians had weapons we'd never seen, tactics we couldn't counter. Good soldiers died because the people in charge didn't understand what they were really fighting." She leaned forward, and Zektar saw something in her eyes that made him understand why she had survived when her unit hadn't. "The Rangers are the galaxy's last line of defense against existential threats. If the Zephyrians have developed anti-Ranger weapons, if they found ways to counter our best people, then we need Rangers who can adapt to impossible situations. Who can fight dirty when honor isn't enough? Who can win when winning means sacrificing everything?" "You're talking about preparing for total war," Zektar realized. "I'm talking about preparing for survival," Sarah corrected, "because sometimes that's the only victory you can achieve." Zektar studied her carefully. Everything made sense now. The hidden military background, the exceptional skills disguised as luck, the determination to succeed despite obvious emotional trauma. Sarah Chen hadn't come to Ranger selection seeking glory or proving humanity's worth. She had come as a warning, a prophet of coming conflict who carried the scars to prove her predictions weren't mere paranoia. "What do you need from me?" he asked finally. "Help me pass selection," Sarah said simply. "And when the time comes, Remember that sometimes the best soldiers are the ones who've already lost everything fighting the last war. The weight of that request settled between them like a challenge. Outside the dining hall, the rest of the candidates continued their training, unaware that the nervous human in their midst might represent their best hope of surviving what was coming. Tomorrow would bring the final evaluations, and Zektar found himself hoping that Sarachen's particular brand of battlefield wisdom would prove sufficient for the challenges ahead. The fourth day brought the psychological breaking point, the impossible mission scenario. Each candidate faced a simulation designed specifically to defeat them, pushing beyond their limits until they failed or broke down completely. The exercise wasn't about success. It was about how someone responded when success became impossible. Zektar observed from the monitoring station as candidates entered their personalized nightmares. Kethrak faced overwhelming numbers that neutralized his physical advantages. Velshan encountered enemies that moved faster than even Aerith reflexes could track. Mortek confronted situations where his defensive capabilities became liabilities. One by one, they failed. The strongest warriors cracked under pressure. The most experienced veterans succumbed to scenarios that offered no winning solutions. Some raged against impossible odds. Others withdrew into catatonic states. A few suffered complete psychological breaks. Then Sarah entered her simulation. The scenario was diabolical in its simplicity. She commanded a small unit defending a civilian evacuation point, while overwhelming enemy forces closed in from all sides. Limited ammunition, no air support, and a steady stream of non-combatants requiring protection. Zektar recognized the psychological torture immediately. The simulation was designed to recreate the exact circumstances that had destroyed her original unit during the border wars. Every detail had been calculated to trigger her survivor guilt and force her to relive her greatest trauma. This seems excessive, Dr. Nexella observed. She's already carrying significant psychological damage from previous experiences. The Rangers need to know how she responds to the worst possible circumstances, Zektar replied, though privately he questioned the ethics of the test. Sarah studied the tactical situation with grim familiarity. Her team consisted of green recruits facing their first combat, civilians who looked to her for protection, and equipment that wouldn't last an hour against the approaching forces. Instead of despair, she began issuing orders with calm efficiency. Martinez, take 3 volunteers and establish overwatch positions on the ridgeline. You're not stopping them, just slowing them down and calling out positions. Johnson, organize the civilians into groups of 20. Establish evacuation routes through the canyon passages. Chen, distribute ammunition according to marksmanship ratings, not rank. Sergeant, one of her virtual soldiers interrupted, we don't have enough firepower to hold them off. Maybe we should consider surrender. Sarah's expression hardened. No one surrenders. No one gets left behind. We hold this position until every civilian is safely evacuated, and then we find a way to get ourselves out. What followed was 3 hours of the most intense combat simulation Zektar had ever witnessed. Sarah's forces were outnumbered 50-1, facing enemies with superior equipment and tactical advantages. By every reasonable military assessment, her position was hopeless. She fought anyway. When ammunition ran low, she coordinated scavenging operations under fire. When defensive positions were overrun, she organized tactical withdrawals to secondary lines. When communications were cut, she maintained unit cohesion through personal leadership and shared determination. The simulation threw everything at her. Wounded soldiers requiring evacuation, civilian casualties demanding medical attention, equipment failures, ammunition shortages, and enemy tactics specifically designed to exploit human psychological vulnerabilities. Sarah adapted to each crisis with innovations that bordered on miraculous. She used enemy weapons against their original owners. She turned defensive weaknesses into tactical advantages. She maintained morale among troops who should have broken under the pressure. Most remarkably, she began achieving the impossible. Evacuation proceeded ahead of schedule. Enemy advances slowed as they encountered unexpectedly effective resistance. Her undermanned unit not only held their position, but began pushing back against overwhelming odds. This is unprecedented, Dr. Nexala breathed. The scenario was designed to be unwinnable. How is she succeeding? Zektar watched Sarah coordinate a counterattack that used the enemy's numerical superiority against them, funneling larger forces into killing zones where they couldn't bring their advantages to bear. Because she's already lived through this, he realized. The simulation is based on her actual combat experience. She's not facing her greatest fear. She's getting a chance to save the people she couldn't save the first time. The psychological implications were staggering. Where other candidates broke under impossible pressure, Sarah found redemption. The scenario designed to destroy her instead became an opportunity to prove that her survival hadn't been meaningless, that the skills purchased with her comrades' blood could protect others. 6 hours into the simulation, Sarah achieved total victory. Every civilian evacuated safely, her unit intact, enemy forces in full retreat. The computer's assessment showed tactical performance beyond anything previously recorded. When she emerged from the simulation chamber, Sarah's legs buckled from exhaustion, but her eyes held something that hadn't been there before: peace. "How do you feel?" Dr. Nexila asked gently. "Like maybe they didn't die for nothing," Sarah replied quietly. The final 2 days of evaluation felt almost anticlimactic after Sarah's performance in the impossible mission. She continued her pattern of exceptional competence disguised as nervous luck, though several candidates now openly acknowledged her tactical abilities. Kethrak approached her during the final evening meal. "Human," he said formally, "I have fought beside many warriors. You possess something rare, the ability to turn defeat into victory through will alone. Whatever your true background, you have earned my respect." Sarah smiled, the expression carrying genuine warmth for the first time since her arrival. "Thank you, Kethrak. That means more than you know." The 6th day brought final evaluations and selection announcements. Of the original 43 candidates, only 8 remained. The survivors represented the cream of galactic military excellence, proven warriors who had exceeded every expectation. Commander Zektar stood before them in the main assembly hall, holding the results that would determine their futures. "Ranger selection demands more than skill or courage," he began. "It requires the ability to succeed when success seems impossible, to protect others when you cannot protect yourself, to make sacrifices that others cannot understand." His gaze found Sarah among the assembled candidates. She stood at attention with military bearing that no longer pretended to be civilian nervousness. Of the 8 candidates before me, 7 have demonstrated exceptional capabilities that would serve the Rangers well under normal circumstances. The qualification hung in the air ominously. However, intelligence reports suggest we face abnormal circumstances, threats that require unconventional responses, warriors who can adapt to impossible situations and find victory where others see only defeat. Zektar held up a single data pad. One candidate has demonstrated these qualities beyond question. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen stepped forward. Sarah moved with crisp military precision, her hidden background finally acknowledged openly. "Your performance during selection was extraordinary," Zektar continued, "but more importantly, your psychological profile indicates the kind of resilience we need for what's coming. You've already faced the worst and survived. You know the cost of failure and the price of victory." He handed her the Ranger insignia, a crystalline badge that caught the light like a captured star. "Welcome to the Void Rangers, Sergeant Chen. May you find the redemption you seek in service to those who cannot protect themselves." As Sarah accepted the insignia, her fingers unconsciously touched the 5 purple hearts beneath her uniform. The gesture no longer spoke of guilt and loss, but of purpose and determination. "What about the others?" she asked. "They'll receive standard military placements appropriate to their skills," Zektar replied. "Good soldiers all, but we need more than good soldiers for what's ahead." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility being placed upon her shoulders. She had come to Ranger selection carrying the ghosts of her fallen comrades. Now she carried the hopes of a galaxy that didn't yet understand the threat approaching from the shadows. "When do I start?" she asked. "Immediately," Zektar replied. "Your first assignment is to help design new training protocols based on your combat experience. We need to prepare other Rangers for the kind of warfare you've already survived." As the ceremony concluded and other candidates departed, Sarah remained behind studying the Ranger insignia in her palm. "Any regrets?" Zektar asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. "About joining the Rangers? No, about the path that brought me here?" She touched her medals one final time. "Not anymore. Sometimes the worst experiences prepare you for the most important work. Zektar nodded, understanding that Sarah Chen had found what she came looking for. Not redemption for surviving when others died, but purpose in using that survival to protect others. The galaxy might not be ready for what was coming, but at least now they had someone who understood the true cost of victory and was willing to pay it again if necessary. 3 months after selection, Sarah stood in the Ranger Operations Center watching tactical displays that confirmed her worst fears. Zephyrian fleet movements indicated massive buildup along the border sectors. Intelligence reports described new weapon technologies specifically designed to counter Ranger tactics. The second phase of the border wars was about to begin. Your assessment was accurate, Commander Zektar admitted, studying the intelligence summaries. They've been preparing for renewed conflict since the ceasefire. Sarah nodded grimly. The question is whether we're ready for what they're bringing this time. Over the past months, she had worked with Ranger Command to develop new training protocols based on hard-learned lessons from the First War. The traditional Ranger approach emphasized individual excellence and species-specific advantages. Sarah's methods focused on adaptive thinking and unconventional solutions. How are the new recruits responding to the modified training? Zektar asked. Better than expected, Sarah replied. It's difficult for some species to abandon their natural advantages, but they're learning to think beyond conventional tactics. The training center had become Sarah's domain, where she pushed elite warriors beyond their comfort zones. Instead of relying on superior firepower or natural abilities, she taught them to use psychology, misdirection, and environmental factors as weapons. Rangers learned to fight dirty when honor wasn't enough. They practiced losing battles to win wars. Most importantly, they learned to adapt when everything went wrong. Contact, multiple bogies incoming. The alert klaxon echoed through the operations center as tactical displays lit up with red warning indicators. A Zephyrian strike force had penetrated the outer defense perimeter, moving toward a civilian research station in the Arcturus system. Standard military forces were 12 hours away. Only the Rangers could respond in time. Scramble Team Alpha, Zektar ordered. Standard rapid response protocol. Wait, Sarah interrupted, studying the tactical display with growing alarm. This isn't a random raid. Look at their formation, their approach vector. They're specifically targeting the Rangers. The attack pattern was designed to exploit traditional Ranger response tactics. Enemy forces had positioned themselves to counter the elite unit's standard advantages, turning their strengths into vulnerabilities. It's a trap, Sarah continued. They want us to respond with conventional tactics so they can test their new anti-Ranger weapons. Zektar's mandibles clicked with frustration. Then what do you suggest? We cannot allow civilian casualties. Sarah studied the display for several seconds, her mind racing through possibilities. The Zephyrians expected Rangers to respond with overwhelming individual skill and species-specific advantages. They had prepared specifically to counter those approaches. We give them what they don't expect, she decided. A coordinated response that doesn't rely on traditional Ranger capabilities. Within minutes, Sarah had assembled an unconventional task force. Instead of the galaxy's most elite warriors, she selected Rangers who specialized in support roles, technical expertise, and unconventional thinking. Her team looked more like a maintenance crew than a strike force. Your approach seems questionable, observed Ranger Velshan, who had successfully completed training after selection. These are not our best fighters. They're exactly what we need, Sarah replied as their transport ship jumped to hyperspace. The Zephyrians are expecting us to fight like Rangers. Instead, we're going to fight like engineers. The journey to Arcturus gave Sarah time to brief her team on tactics that traditional military thinking would consider absurd. Instead of engaging enemy forces directly, they would target infrastructure. Rather than showcasing individual prowess, they would use coordinated misdirection. When they arrived in system, the Zephyrian trap was already sprung. Enemy forces had disabled the research station's defenses and were systematically hunting for Rangers they expected to respond. Conventionally, Sarah's team bypassed the enemy entirely. Using maintenance tunnels and service corridors, they infiltrated the station through paths no military force would consider tactically relevant. While Zephyrian forces waited for heroic rescue attempts, Rangers rewired power systems, rerouted life support, and accessed computer networks. Target the station's waste management system, Sarah instructed. Overload the atmospheric processors, create emergency alerts that will force personnel evacuation. You want to use sewage as a weapon? Asked Ranger Mortek, his granite-born sensibilities clearly offended. I want to use their expectations against them, Sarah corrected. They're prepared for glorious combat. They're not prepared for technical warfare. What followed was the most unconventional rescue operation in Ranger history. Instead of fighting the enemy, Sarah's team made their position untenable. Life support failures forced Zephyrian troops to abandon occupied areas. Computer viruses disabled their communications. Power fluctuations neutralized their advanced weapons. The enemy found themselves fighting the station itself rather than Ranger personnel. This is not honorable combat, protested Velshan as they evacuated civilians through maintenance shafts. Honor doesn't protect innocent people, Sarah replied. Results do. By the time conventional military forces arrived, the crisis was over. Civilians had been safely evacuated. Zephyrian forces had withdrawn in confusion, and the enemy's anti-Ranger weapons had proven useless against tactics they hadn't anticipated. Remarkable success, Commander Zektar acknowledged during the debriefing, though your methods were highly unconventional. They worked, Sarah pointed out. And more importantly, they gave us intelligence about enemy capabilities without revealing our own new training protocols. The operation marked a turning point in Ranger doctrine. Sarah's approach proved that humanity's greatest contribution to galactic defense wasn't superior individual ability, but adaptive thinking that refused to accept conventional limitations. The Zephyrians will adapt to these tactics, Zektar warned. Then we'll adapt faster, Sarah replied confidently. That's what humans do. We survive by changing the rules when the old rules don't work anymore. Over the following weeks, reports filtered in from across the border sectors. Zephyrian forces were probing defenses, testing responses, gathering intelligence for the major offensive everyone knew was coming. But something had changed in how the galaxy's defenders responded. Rangers trained in Sarah's methods were turning conventional defeats into unexpected victories. Enemies prepared for heroic last stands instead faced psychological warfare, technical sabotage, and tactical misdirection. Your influence is spreading, Dr. Nexala observed during one of their regular sessions. How does it feel to change galactic military doctrine? Sarah considered the question while unconsciously touching the 5 purple hearts she still wore beneath her uniform. The medals no longer represented guilt and loss, but lessons purchased with blood that could now protect others. Like maybe my squad didn't die for nothing, she said quietly. Like their sacrifice is still saving lives. As reports continued arriving about successful unconventional operations across the galaxy, Sarah realized that her greatest victory wasn't joining the Rangers or proving humanity's worth. It was transforming the grief of survival into the strength to protect others, turning the worst experiences of war into the wisdom needed to prevent future tragedies. The Zephyrians were still coming, but now they would face defenders who refused to fight by rules that favored the enemy. They would encounter Rangers who understood that sometimes the only way to win was to change what winning meant, and leading them would be a woman who had learned that the heaviest burdens could become the strongest foundations, that survival was meaningless unless it served a purpose greater than mere existence. The nervous first-timer who had arrived at selection months ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength wasn't about individual prowess or species advantages, but about the willingness to sacrifice personal glory for collective survival. Sarah Chen had found her redemption in service to others, and in doing so, had given the galaxy its best hope for surviving the darkness that was coming.